Today's story is so tense it steals your breath, set in the dust-choked heart of the Wild West beneath a blood-red sky. This is a place where fugitives, warriors, and broken souls collide at the edge of survival. It all began with a single telegraph signal, something so small, yet powerful enough to pull two hunted strangers into a war that could destroy them both. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The wind sculpted ghostly shapes across the crimson desert, stirring veils of dust over the bones of Whispering Mesa in the fading light of November, 1876. Arlen Vale knelt in the hardened dirt behind the collapsed assay office, her gloved fingers clenched around the hilt of a cavalry blade, its tip broken long ago in some forgotten skirmish. The steel felt icy through the thin fabric, and the tremor in her hands came not from the wind, but from fear she could no longer suppress. Just a few paces away, close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw and the subtle rise of his chest, knelt Taza Neche. Dried blood streaked across his knuckles, the marks of long travel and harder battles. His buckskin shirt bore the stains of sweat and dust. His face was carved in stoic stillness, every muscle set in restraint. He was Apache, perhaps 30 winters old, the years showing only faintly at the corners of his eyes. He gripped the other end of the sword without flinching. The silence between them stretched taut as a drawn bowstring, charged with the threat of motion. Somewhere beyond the mesa, the faint metallic ticking of the repaired mesa telegraph whispered through the dusk, each click a heartbeat of distant messages running along the army's lines. She had wired that relay herself, scavenging parts from abandoned rails, her hands guided by memories of her father's patient lessons back in Boston. Another life, another world. Arlen's breath came quick and shallow, catching in her throat. Her once blue calico dress was torn, patched with canvas, and heavy with red dust. Her nails were rimmed with grit, her hands scarred and calloused from weeks of surviving the wilderness. She hadn't seen her reflection in months, but knew her face had grown lean, her eyes sharper. Still, she met his gaze, defiant, unyielding, refusing to be another soul swallowed by this cruel land. "If you're going to kill me," she said, voice steadier than her heart, "then do it. Otherwise, lower the blade." Taza's expression didn't change. His jaw tightened, the bronze of his skin etched by sun and wind. A pale scar curved above his brow, a memory of another fight. For 10 heartbeats, maybe more, she thought he might strike, that this strange standoff would end with one swift motion. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but she didn't look away. Slowly, deliberately, he shifted his stance. Instead of striking, he turned the shattered blade flat and lowered it to the dirt, his grip steady on the hilt. "Talk," he said, his voice roughened by thirst and solitude. Arlen exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her grip eased, though she didn't release the blade. Trust was a thing neither of them could afford. The wind rose, swirling fine red sand through the ghost town's empty streets. Whispering Mesa had once been a silver boomtown, now just ruins and wind. And here they were, 2 strangers kneeling in its dust with a broken sword between them. She swallowed the taste of sand and fear. "You followed the signal," she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded once. 3 nights. I thought you were Army, sending word to the patrols hunting my people." "I'm not Army," she replied quickly. "I'm stealing their transmissions, trying to stay alive." His gaze narrowed, studying her face with unnerving intensity. "Why risk it?" "Because I have nowhere else to go." The words cost her more than she expected, but in his eyes she saw something shift, a shared recognition between two hunted souls. Taza's eyes flicked toward the mesa, where the telegraph wires glinted faintly. You fixed that relay alone? Yes. You know the code, every cipher? I've been listening for weeks. He brushed his thumb along the edge of the blade, then reached across it, slow, deliberate, and lifted her hand from the hilt. His touch was warm and calloused, sending a tremor through her that wasn't fear. She didn't pull away. Then we have a problem, he said quietly. You have the ears I need, and I have what you need most. Her throat tightened. What's that? Protection. He paused, eyes dark with purpose. There's a doctor, army man, travels with medicine, vaccines, carbolic acid, laudanum. He rides through this territory soon, and I must find him before the patrols do. Why? She asked, though the answer was already forming in her mind. Smallpox, he said at last, his voice low and raw. My sister, Cialatea, without medicine. She will die. The words struck her like a blow, simple, brutal, and true. Arlen felt something twist inside her, something that reached back to a memory she could never bury, her little brother, fevered and fading at 12. No prayer had saved him then. Now, staring into the eyes of this Apache warrior, she felt the same ache rise again. A sorrow she thought she'd left behind in another life. I can help you find him, Arlen Vale said, the decision made before she could fully explain it, even to herself. But you'll have to trust me. You have to. Taza Neche studied her face, his eyes searching for deceit. Then, with a deliberate movement, he released the saber completely and shifted, kneeling beside her. Now, shoulder to shoulder, both faced the ridge together. The closeness startled her. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, hear the steady rhythm of his breathing. It was the first time in months she'd been this near another living soul who didn't want her dead. From somewhere down the slope, the Mesa telegraph clicked again. Faint, rhythmic, urgent. Taza tilted his head, listening. What does it say? He asked. Arlen closed her eyes, translating the pattern by instinct. Patrol route, northwest at dawn. Her breath hitched. They're searching for me. For what reason? His hand drifted toward the knife at his belt. For stragglers from the Iron Mesa tribe, she said. After Custer, the army wants blood. They're sweeping this whole region, she warned, voice tightening with urgency. If you're alone out here, I know the risks. Do you? Her hand shot out, gripping his forearm, solid, warm, unyielding. They're not taking prisoners, Taza. They're shooting on sight. He looked down at her hand, then up into her eyes. Something shifted in his expression, the faintest crack in his composure. Then we move, he said quietly. Fast. Together. A low rumble broke through the wind, the unmistakable tremor of hooves. Both froze. On the horizon, a thin line of dust rose against the amber sky. Riders, at least 5, approaching at a steady trot. The relay, Arlen hissed. If they find it, we hide it, now. They sprinted across the open ground, abandoning the shattered blade. Arlen's boots slipped on the loose gravel, and Taza caught her elbow, steadying her without breaking stride. They reached the ridge and ducked behind the remains of an old miner's shack. The Mesa telegraph was nestled in a crack of stone, its copper wires faintly glinting in the dying light. Arlen dropped to her knees, disconnecting the leads with trembling fingers. Taza crouched beside her, watching the dust trail draw closer. How long? He asked. 30 seconds. Too long. His hand closed over hers, halting the frantic motion. Leave it. We go. Now. They bolted down the far side of the ridge. Behind them, the riders crested the rise, their shouts slicing through the wind. The metallic click of rifles echoed behind them. They ran. And then the storm came, sudden and furious as they often did across the Arizona territory. A wall of red sand that swallowed the sun and turned daylight to rust-colored dusk. For 2 hours, they pressed eastward, weaving through the broken land to throw off pursuit. Then the sky darkened again, and the wind howled like a wounded beast. There! Taza pointed to a jagged outcropping barely visible through the rising haze. They lunged for it just as the storm hit full force. The wind screamed, hurling sand like glass shards. They dove beneath the overhang, pressed close in the shallow hollow of rock. The storm raged around them, a living, roaring thing, until they could barely see their own hands. Sand coated everything: skin, hair, eyes, breath. Arlen pulled her collar up over her mouth, her voice barely carrying over the wind. "How long?" "Hours," he shouted back. "Maybe more." He shifted, making space, his shoulder pressing firmly against hers. "We wait." They had no other choice. To move now meant death, buried alive beneath the drifting sands of Ghost Hollow. So they huddled together, the world reduced to darkness and the sound of the storm clawing at stone. Arlen's teeth chattered uncontrollably, despite the heat of him beside her. The cold seeped into her bones, not the kind that froze skin, but the kind that drained life. "Tell me about Boston," Taza said suddenly, his voice rough but steady. "What?" She turned, barely making out his silhouette through the swirling grit. "You're home," he said. "It'll keep your mind awake. The cold kills slow if you let it make you sleep." She understood. Sleep meant death. So she talked. She told him of her father's workshop, of learning the telegraph code by candlelight, of copper wires and warm solder, of the day she lost her brother to fever, of the mill owner who framed her, and the long, terrifying flight west with nothing but a carpet bag and a promise to herself not to die forgotten. When her voice finally faded, silence filled the hollow, broken only by the endless hiss of wind. Then Taza spoke, low and raw. "Cialatea is 12 winters. She laughs like water over stone. She wanted to hunt, so I taught her. My father, Nantankoa, said daughters should not hunt, but I taught her anyway." He paused, the faintest crack in his tone, a man holding back more than the storm could ever strip away. "3 weeks ago, the first red spots appeared," Taza Neche said quietly, his voice cracked, barely holding steady. "Now she burns with fever and no longer knows our mother's face." Arlen Vale's throat tightened. Without thinking, she reached for his hand in the dark, and found it. His fingers closed around hers, firm, almost fierce. "We'll find the doctor," she whispered. "We'll save her." "You can't promise that." "No," she admitted softly. "But I can promise to try." Something in the darkness shifted. The sound of his breathing, the weight of silence between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, rougher. "Why?" "Because you'd do the same," she said simply. She couldn't have explained how she knew, but she did. In the few hours since their standoff, she'd seen enough to understand the kind of man he was. One who protected those who couldn't fight back. One who bore his burdens in silence. Outside, the storm still howled, but within their fragile shelter, something small and fragile had begun to grow. Not trust, not yet, but the fragile seed of it. When dawn came, gray and bitter cold, the storm had passed. They crawled out from beneath the overhang to find the desert transformed. The dunes had shifted, familiar shapes buried under drifts of red sand. Arlen's body ached from the cold and the cramped shelter, her throat raw from breathing dust all night. Taza studied the horizon with narrowed eyes. We must find landmarks. The storm changed everything. They moved slowly, following the sun and the distant outline of mountains, silent travelers across an unfamiliar wasteland. Every step had to be cautious. Rattlesnakes, sinkholes, or worse, other people could end them quicker than thirst. By midday, they found a shallow creek bed, still holding a thin trickle of water. They knelt beside it, drinking carefully. Bad water could kill faster than any bullet. As Arlen splashed her face, a low sound from Taza froze her in place. She reached for the rusted revolver tucked in her belt. 3 men stepped out from behind a cluster of boulders, dusty, rough-looking, with the eyes of men who had long since traded conscience for coin. Road agents, bandits. The frontier was full of them, men driven from war or drawn by greed. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a scar running from temple to jaw, grinned when he saw her. "Well, look at that. A plains rat and his lady. Ain't that sweet?" Taza didn't answer. His hand hovered near his knife, his body still but coiled tight as a drawn spring. "We don't want trouble," Arlen said, keeping her voice steady. "No trouble at all," Scarface replied, flashing yellowed teeth. "Just hand over what you've got, and we'll be on our way. That's a fine carbine you're carrying, Chief." His 2 men began to fan out, trying to flank them. Their movements were practiced. This wasn't their first ambush. Taza's eyes flicked between them. A fight could get them both killed, but giving up their weapons meant certain death later. The air tensed. Then one of the flanking men made a mistake. He let his gaze linger on Arlen a moment too long, his smirk twisting her stomach. Taza moved first. 2 strides, fast as lightning. His knife flashed once, clean and sharp. The man's rifle clattered to the stones as blood spilled from his sliced hand. Arlen didn't freeze. She snatched a rock the size of her fist and hurled it at the second man with all her strength. It struck his face squarely, shattering his nose in a burst of blood. Scarface jerked his rifle toward Taza, but Arlen was already up, revolver shaking in her hands. "Don't," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Scarface froze. 1 man was down, clutching his bleeding hand. Another staggered, cursing and blinded, and now the woman stood with a gun leveled at his chest. "This ain't worth dying for," she warned. Scarface glared at her, weighing his odds. She had maybe 3 bullets, if that. But Taza's stance said one wrong move would end him before he pulled a trigger. "You're making a mistake," the outlaw growled. "Walk away," Arlen said. "Take your men and go. We have nothing worth your lives." He spat into the dust. "This ain't over." "Yes, it is," Taza said. His voice was flat, calm, dangerous. Blood dripped from the edge of his knife. "Tell the others. This woman and this man are not easy prey. Spread the word." Something in his tone made Scarface hesitate. Then, with a glare and a string of curses, he motioned for his men to retreat. Only when the last of them vanished beyond the rocks did Arlen lower her revolver. Her hands trembled so badly she almost dropped it. Taza took it gently from her, opened the cylinder, and checked the chambers. 3 rounds. 1 cracked. It would have misfired. When he looked back at her, there was something different in his eyes. Respect. "You didn't run," he said. "Neither did you," she replied, her voice shaking from the flood of adrenaline. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "We fight well together." It was a simple statement, but it carried weight. Standing there in the dry creek bed, blood still wet on the rocks and her pulse hammering in her throat, Arlen Vale knew something had shifted between them. Whatever line had existed before, between strangers forced together by circumstance, had been quietly crossed. They were something else now. Partners, maybe, or something without a name yet. Taza Neche wiped his blade clean on his trousers and slid it back into its sheath. "We should move," he said, voice low but certain. "They might come back with more." Arlen nodded, gathering her few belongings. But before she turned to leave, she met his eyes. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not hesitating, for trusting that I'd act." A faint change crossed his expression, soft, almost imperceptible. "You have a warrior's heart. I saw it when we met." She couldn't find words for that, so she just walked beside him as they headed east, the space between them feeling smaller than before. 3 days later, they reached Coyote Crossing at dusk. Bone-tired, nearly out of water. The settlement was little more than a scattering of life across the flat plains, a sagging rail shack, a few weather-beaten homesteads, and a one-room schoolhouse perched on a small rise. A wisp of gray smoke trailed from its chimney, and the faint smell of stew made Arlen's empty stomach tighten. A woman stepped out as they approached, mid-30s, hair streaked with gray and tied back in a no-nonsense bun. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, her manner brisk. "You look half dead," she said plainly, then nodded toward the schoolhouse. "Come inside. I've got stew and coffee." Arlen nearly wept from relief. Inside, warmth from a pot-belly stove wrapped around them like grace itself. The schoolroom was neat, rows of benches, chalk dust still on the blackboard, and a shelf of worn books that had clearly seen years of use. The woman ladled out thick stew into tin bowls and poured coffee dark enough to strip varnish. "Eat first," she said. "Talk after." They didn't argue. Hunger left no room for pride. The stew, beans, salt pork, potatoes, tasted like heaven. Strength began creeping back into Arlen's limbs with each spoonful. When the bowls were empty, the woman refilled their coffee and sat across from them at the rough-hewn table. "Now," she said, folding her hands, "who are you, and why are you here?" Arlen glanced at Taza. His face gave nothing away. But something in the woman's gaze told her lies wouldn't survive long here. So she told the truth. About fleeing Boston, about the Mesa telegraph, about the search for the army doctor who might save Tea. The woman, Mara Boone, she introduced herself, listened without interruption, eyes steady, face unreadable. When Arlen finished, silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then Mara spoke. "Dr. Eli Hart," she said. "Army physician, travels under contract. He's scheduled to pass through Singing Stone in 3 days, then continue toward the reservation." Hope flickered in Taza's dark eyes. "You're certain?" "I keep records," Mara replied simply. "Knowing who comes and goes is how I survive." She poured another round of coffee. "But there's a problem." Arlen frowned. "What kind of problem?" "Wade Crow, the mine owner up by Whispering Mesa, has been leaning on the territorial governor. Wants the Apache camps cleared from the rail line. Says they're on land he intends to use for a new spur to his silver operation." "How?" Arlen asked. "By using the smallpox outbreak," Mara said grimly. "He's calling for quarantine zones. Claims the tribes are spreading the sickness." Her eyes softened as she glanced at Taza. "But we both know that's not the truth." Taza's jaw tightened. "He'll force my people from the land." "Or worse." Mara's tone was dark. "I've seen the telegrams. Crows moving supplies and a work engine to Ghost Hollow, supposedly for repairs, but I don't buy it." Arlen felt a chill crawl up her spine. "What do you think he's planning?" "I think he'll lure the families in with promises of medicine and use the Army's quarantine orders as an excuse to strike. Make it look like a riot, then seize the land." Mara's eyes hardened. "It's not the first time he's done it. I lost my husband to men like him. Rail accident, they said. But he knew too much about Crow's land schemes. Then came the collapse, and 3 dead men buried under twisted steel. You can't prove it? Taza asked quietly. Her jaw clenched. No. That's why he's still walking free. She looked down at her coffee, voice thick with bitterness. But I've been watching him for 3 years, waiting for a chance to bring him down. There was something in her tone that made Arlen uneasy, an edge sharper than grief, deeper than anger. But exhaustion dulled her instinct. Rest here tonight, Mara said at last, her voice softening again. Tomorrow we'll make a plan. You'll need help if you're going up against Crow. Arlen Vale wanted to ask more, to press deeper into the shadows behind Mara Boone's story. But exhaustion won out. Her eyes burned with sleeplessness, and when Mara led them to a small storage room lined with blankets, she collapsed the moment she touched the floor. Sleep claimed her before her thoughts could. The next morning, Mara was already awake, bustling with quiet purpose. She handed them supplies, hardtack, dried apples, a canteen of clean water. But what she offered next caught Arlen off guard, a neatly drawn map of the Ghost Hollow region, marked with patrol routes and the boundaries of Wade Crow's holdings. How did you get this? Arlen asked, tracing the precise red ink lines. I told you, Mara said, her face unreadable. I keep track of things. Then she added, almost casually, and there's more. I've still got black powder left from the old mine at Whispering Mesa. If you need to cause a distraction or... She paused, her voice lowering. Something more permanent. I can provide it. Taza Neche frowned. Why are you helping us? Because I want Crow to pay for what he's done, Mara said, her tone firm but edged with something darker. And because I've been waiting 3 years for the right moment to strike, you two might just be that moment. The unease Arlen had felt the night before crept back, stronger now. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing we stop him, once and for all, Mara said, her eyes glittering with a hard, feverish light. He plans to move on Ghost Hollow in 4 days. We need to be there first, to warn the Iron Mesa families, yes, but also to make sure Crow can't rebuild when this is done. We end it. Burn it down to the foundations if we have to. And if innocent people get caught in the middle? Arlen asked quietly. Then we do what we can to get them clear first, Mara replied, her tone too calm, too practiced. Taza met Arlen's gaze. They both knew they needed help. There was no denying that. But something about Mara's fervor felt dangerous. Still, time was slipping away, and families were walking straight into a trap. We'll work with you, Arlen said slowly. But we do this carefully. No unnecessary risk to the people we're trying to save. Mara nodded, though Arlen caught a flicker in her eyes. Impatience, calculation, maybe both. Of course, she said. I want justice, not a massacre. But the way she said justice made Arlen's stomach twist. Over the next 3 days, they prepared. Mara taught Arlen how to handle black powder, how to pack it tight, how to rig a fuse, how to time a burn with nothing more than a match and patience. Taza ranged out across the ridges, memorizing every dry wash, every cut in the land that could be used for cover or ambush. At night, they gathered in the schoolhouse to plan. Mara produced telegrams she'd intercepted, their edges burned and smudged with fingerprints. The messages revealed coordination between Crow and Jeb Maddox, his bought deputy. One message caught Arlen's attention. It was addressed to someone signed only as Judge Callahan, and it spoke of eliminating the problem permanently once the land is secured. Who's Judge Callahan? Arlen asked. Mara shrugged. No idea. Maybe some Eastern investor backing Crow, someone with power enough to keep him untouchable. But the phrasing in the telegram nagged at Arlen. The cipher wasn't standard army code. There was something off about it, something personal. She stored that thought away. Too many immediate fires burning to follow that one yet. On the third night, as they sat by the stove reviewing their final plans, Taza looked across the table and asked quietly, "Mara Boone, your husband's death. How did you know it wasn't an accident?" Her face shuttered instantly. "I found his notes," she said. "Records about irregularities in Crow's land deals. When I tried to take them to the authorities, they vanished. My house was broken into. Everything was stolen." "But you remember what was in them?" Arlen asked. "Every word," Mara said, her tone hard as iron. "That's why I've kept watch on Crow ever since. That's why I know exactly how he works." Taza held her gaze for a long, quiet moment. "Revenge is a sharp knife," he said at last. "It cuts both ways." "I'm aware of the cost," Mara replied evenly. "But some debts have to be paid." Later, as Arlen and Taza lay in their makeshift quarters, he spoke softly in the dark. "She walks a dark path," he murmured. "Be careful." "I know," Arlen whispered back. "Her help's useful, but dangerous." "For now," he agreed. When he finally slept, his hand still rested near his knife. Arlen lay awake, staring into the dark, listening to the wind moan across the plains. She wondered what kind of storm they were walking into, and which side of it Mara Boone truly stood on. The night before they were to ride for Ghost Hollow, Arlen couldn't sleep. She slipped outside into the cold desert air. The prairie stretched wide beneath an endless field of stars, the silence broken only by the sighing wind. She found a flat rock on the hillside and sat down, drawing her coat tighter. The cold bit through the fabric, but the space, the quiet, helped her think. A moment later she heard footsteps behind her. Taza Neche moved with that same effortless quiet she'd come to recognize after weeks of travel, the kind of silence born of a lifetime spent surviving the wild. "Can't sleep?" he asked, lowering himself onto the cold rock beside her. "Too many thoughts," Arlen Vale admitted. They sat together beneath the vast stretch of sky, where the stars wheeled slow and steady over the sleeping prairie. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Taza broke the silence. "Tell me about your father." The question caught her off guard. "Why?" "Because tomorrow we fight," he said simply, his tone like the low rumble of distant thunder. "And I'd know the woman who fights beside me." Arlen's throat tightened. She'd only ever mentioned her father once, during that night in the sandstorm. But now, under the quiet weight of starlight, she found herself wanting to share. "He was patient," she said softly. "Endlessly so. When I was 8, I tangled a telegraph circuit so bad it took him 2 days to fix. He never yelled, never lost his temper. Just showed me how to do it right and made me practice until I could." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "He believed women could do anything men could, if given the chance. That belief cost him friends and work, but he never bent." Taza nodded. "He sounds like a good man." "He was," she said quietly. "Lung fever took him when I was 18. 1 week he was fine, the next—" She looked down. "My mother didn't last much longer. Grief hollowed her out until there was nothing left of her." Taza's voice softened. "My father fell in battle when I was 16 winters. He taught me to hunt, to track, to see what others overlook. He said a warrior without eyes that see and heart that feels is no warrior, just a killer." "Is that why you're so careful?" she asked. "Always watching, always thinking ahead?" "Yes," he said, "and because not watching means dying." He turned toward her, his face in shadow, eyes catching the faint glint of starlight. "Sialatea," My sister. She's all I have left. My mother died last winter. Now Ciala burns with the sickness your people brought, and I can't reach her fast enough." His words trembled with control, but the grief beneath them was sharp and raw. Without thinking, Arlen reached for his hand. This time it didn't feel like a gesture of comfort. It felt earned. "We'll reach her," she said quietly. "Dr. Eli Hart will have what she needs, if we make it through tomorrow." "We will," Taza replied. She wished she could believe it as fully as she said it. His fingers tightened around hers, warm, strong, grounding. "When I first saw you, holding that broken sword," he said, voice low, "I thought you were foolish." "Someone with no other choice," she murmured. "No," he said. "Someone with courage. I know courage when I see it. You have a warrior's heart, Arlen Vale." The way he spoke her name, slow, deliberate, careful on his tongue, sent something warm fluttering through her chest. They had come so far since that first standoff, from suspicion and steel to this quiet, fragile connection beneath the stars. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "of tomorrow, of what we'll find, of whether we're doing the right thing." "Good," he said. "Fear keeps you alive, but it's not enough." He shifted closer until their shoulders touched. "You must also have hope." "Do you?" she asked softly. For a long moment he was silent. Then he said, "I hope my sister lives. I hope my people find peace. And—" He hesitated, the pause long enough for her to feel the weight of the words before they came. "I hope this isn't the last night I sit beneath the stars with you." Her breath caught. The meaning in his tone was unmistakable, even wrapped in restraint. "I hope that too," she whispered. They stayed there until the cold drove them back inside, shoulders touching, hands clasped. The vast western night bore witness to something small and fragile being born. Trust, maybe, or something deeper still. Dawn came gray and bitter cold over Ghost Hollow. Arlen, Taza, Mara, and two of Mara's allies, Roy Mercer and Finn Danner, both local farmhands, crouched behind a jagged ridge, watching the valley below. 20 Iron Mesa families had gathered near the trestle, drawn by word of a doctor bringing medicine. Women held shivering children. Elders sat in quiet dignity beside small fires. Young warriors kept watch, alert but uncertain. They waited for help that would never come. "They're exposed," Arlen whispered. "There," Taza said, pointing towards the horizon. A column of black smoke curled up from the west, the work engine. "Right on schedule," Mara Boone murmured. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with something that made Arlen's stomach knot. "Arlen, you remember how to set the charges?" "Yes," Arlen said, her voice tight. She glanced at Taza, who met her look with a single nod, silent understanding between them. Whatever happened next, the dawn at Ghost Hollow would change everything. Arlen Vale's hands moved fast, her fingers steady despite the tension coiling inside her. She checked each bundle of black powder, each strip of copper wire, every piece of the makeshift detonator Mara Boone had crafted from scavenged telegraph parts. "Good," Mara said briskly. "Finn, Roy, once the blast starts, get the families clear. Taza, you keep Jeb Maddox's men pinned down. I'll handle Wade Crow myself." Something in her tone made Arlen look up sharply. "Handle him how?" "However necessary." Mara met her gaze without flinching, and in that instant, Arlen saw it, the darkness that had always been there beneath the schoolteacher's careful manners. This wasn't justice, this was vengeance. "Mara," Arlen said carefully, "we need to be—" "Careful?" Mara snapped, her voice cutting like glass. I've been careful for 3 years. I've watched Crow buy the law, kill good men, ruin families. Today, that ends. Completely. What are you planning? Taza asked, his tone flat and wary. Mara reached into her satchel and pulled out another bundle of black powder, twice as large as the others. The mine, she said. Crow's entire operation is built on it. I'm going to bring it down, bury his machines, his men, everything he's built. Arlen felt her stomach twist. That mine borders the settlement. If you collapse the wrong shaft, you'll bury the homes too. Acceptable risk, Mara said coldly. No. Taza rose to his feet, his hand hovering near the knife at his belt. We protect people, all people. That was the agreement. The agreement, Mara shot back, was to stop Crow. You want to save your sister? You want peace for your people? Then we make sure he never rises again. That means the mine. That means risk. The argument burned hot and fast. Arlen realized then that Mara had been steering them all along, feeding them just enough truth to pull them into her plan. The kind-hearted teacher had been a mask for something far more dangerous. We're not doing this, Arlen said, stepping beside Taza. Not your way. Mara's expression hardened into ice. Then you're fools, and you'll die as fools. She gestured sharply. Roy, Finn, come with me. We're finishing this the right way. For a heartbeat, Arlen thought she'd draw on them. But Finn Danner, the younger of the two, stepped forward, his face pale. Miss Mara, he said quietly, I signed up to help folks, not to hurt them. My cousin's down there with those families. I can't do this. Then you're as weak as they are, Mara hissed. She grabbed the satchel of explosives and stormed down the ridge. Roy Mercer hesitated, then followed her with a conflicted glance. Finn remained, his voice trembling. She's gonna do it anyway, he said. She's been planning this for months, maybe years. I thought she just wanted to expose Crow, but... He swallowed hard. She wants him dead, and she doesn't care who else dies with him. Taza and Arlen exchanged a single look, sharp understanding passing between them. We split up, Arlen said, already moving. Taza, get the families away from the trestle and the mine. Finn, go with him. Warn everyone, I'll stop Mara. How? Finn asked, panic edging his voice. Arlen's jaw tightened. She taught me how to wire a fuse. I can damn well tear one apart. Taza's hand gripped her shoulder. Be careful. She's dangerous. So am I. The words came out fierce, steady, and true. Gone was the frightened woman who'd fled Boston. The desert had burned that fear out of her and left something harder in its place. They split. Taza and Finn raced down the slope toward the clustered Iron Mesa families, shouting for them to move. Arlen turned the other way, sprinting along the narrow trail that led toward the mine. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She found Mara at the entrance, setting charges along the timber braces, her face alight with manic energy. Come to help? Mara called without turning. Good. We'll finish this together. Arlen drew her revolver. I came to stop you. Step away from the powder. Mara laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that scraped like flint on steel. You won't shoot me, she said. You're too soft. That's your weakness, Arlen, Mara Boone said, her voice trembling with rage. You still believe mercy has a place in this world. It's not weakness to refuse to murder innocent people, Arlen shot back, her tone steady as stone. Innocent? Mara's face twisted, fury carving deep lines across it. Everyone in that settlement serves Wade Crow one way or another. They live off blood money, off stolen land, off men like my husband who were shot and buried with no names. They're all guilty. Arlen's voice softened, trying to reach the last shred of the woman who'd once cared for her students. Your husband wouldn't want this. For an instant, something flickered in Mara's eyes. Pain, doubt, memory. But it vanished just as quickly. "Don't you dare presume to know what my husband would want," she hissed, turning back to her satchel of explosives. "Last chance, Arlen. Help me, or stay out of my way." Arlen raised her revolver. Her hands did not shake. "I can't let you do this." Mara moved faster than Arlen expected, her hand darting into her apron, drawing a small pistol. "Then I guess we both made our choices." The silence that followed was taut as a drawn wire. Then came a sound from the valley below. Gunfire, sharp and relentless. Both women froze, turning toward it. Crow's men had arrived and were firing into the cluster of terrified Iron Mesa families below. Arlen reacted first. She lunged forward, grabbing the wire, running to Mara's detonator, yanking it loose. Sparks jumped, the connection dying in an instant. Mara screamed in rage and fired. The bullet tore past Arlen's face so close, she felt its heat graze her cheek. Arlen dove behind a heap of timbers as another shot splintered the wood beside her. She crawled deeper into the mine, ripping out wires and scattering powder kegs as she went. Mara's furious shouts echoed behind her, half curse, half grief. Arlen didn't stop until every fuse was cut and every circuit ruined. When she finally emerged, breathing hard, revolver raised, Mara was gone. Through the drifting dust, Arlen saw her, a figure running downhill toward the gunfire, toward Ghost Hollow, toward Crow. Arlen ran after her. The valley below was chaos. Crow's steam engine sat belching black smoke from its stack. Men with rifles poured from the boxcars, shooting at anything that moved. Women clutched children, fleeing toward the dry creek bed. At the center of it all stood Taza Neche, firing his Spencer carbine with grim precision, cutting down attackers while shouting orders to help the families scatter for cover. Arlen's eyes caught movement to the right. Jeb Maddox on horseback, his face twisted in hatred, aiming his rifle at a fleeing mother holding a child. Without thinking, Arlen raised her revolver and fired. The bullet went wide. She wasn't a marksman, but it whistled close enough to make his horse rear, throwing his aim. Maddox's glare found her instantly. Recognition flashed in his eyes as he wheeled his horse and charged straight for her. Arlen turned and ran. 2 bullets left, maybe one that would fire clean. Maddox thundered after her, rage and dust closing the gap. She sprinted toward a ridge of boulders. Bullets tore the earth at her heels. Then suddenly, Taza was there, stepping into Maddox's path with calm, deadly purpose. Maddox swung down from his horse, drawing a long knife. The 2 men began to circle, their eyes locked, like wolves testing for weakness. "You should have stayed on your reservation, Chief," Maddox snarled. "You'd have lived longer." "You should have stayed honest, Deputy," Taza replied. "You'd have died cleaner." They collided with a crash of steel and fury. There was no order, no mercy, just raw survival. Maddox had brute strength and hatred. Taza had skill, speed, and the fire of a man who refused to yield. Maddox's knee slammed into Taza's ribs. Arlen heard the crack even from yards away. Taza's elbow answered, crushing into Maddox's throat, leaving him choking. But the deputy's weight drove Taza backward, slamming him into the dirt. They rolled in the dust, grappling, striking, clawing for air. Maddox's hands closed around Taza's throat, his face purple with effort. "This is for my brother," he spat. "The one your people killed at the Yellowstone." So that was it. The true poison burning in him. Not greed. Revenge. Arlen saw it in his eyes. He wouldn't stop. He couldn't. She looked down and saw the spirit blade lying half-buried beside her, the broken saber she'd carried since Whispering Mesa. Without hesitation, she gripped the hilt and swung, smashing it into Maddox's temple. The impact jarred her arm to the bone, but it was enough. Maddox reeled, releasing his hold. Taza rolled free, coughing for air. The deputy staggered upright, blood streaming from his head, fumbling for his revolver. Taza moved faster. His knife flashed once, clean, precise, and Maddox went down, surprise frozen on his face. For a moment, only the sound of the wind filled the air. Taza stood over the fallen man, blood on his lip, his ribs broken but his spirit unbroken. "Come," he said hoarsely to Arlen. "We must find Crow." They didn't have to look far. Wade Crow stood on the steel platform of his roaring work engine, a Winchester leveled in his hands. Smoke curled around him like a crown, his expression calm, detached, as if he were watching ants burn under a magnifying glass. Below, the world burned because of him. And climbing toward him, knife glinting in her fist, was Mara Boone. Her jaw was set, her face pale but unshaken. "No," Arlen Vale shouted, her voice swallowed by the crash of gunfire and the cries below. Mara reached the platform, lunged. Crow turned, surprise flashing across his face, and fired. The bullet tore into her shoulder, spinning her halfway around. But she didn't fall. With a last burst of strength, she drove the blade upward, sinking it deep into his side. Both went down together, locked in a final, brutal embrace of vengeance. Arlen and Taza Neche climbed up the side of the engine, the metal hot beneath their hands. Mara was still alive. Barely. Blood pooled beneath her, soaking the wooden planks. Crow lay beside her, gasping, his face ashen, one hand clamped to the wound in his ribs. "Mara." Arlen dropped to her knees beside her. "Why couldn't you let justice handle it?" Mara's eyes found hers, the wild fire fading into something softer. Human. "Because justice is slow," she whispered, voice trembling, "and I couldn't wait anymore. Couldn't." She coughed, red froth touching her lips. "Tell the children. Tell them I'm sorry I couldn't finish the term." Her breath caught and stopped. Her eyes stayed open, staring into the smoke-stained sky. Tears stung Arlen's eyes, not for the vengeful woman Mara had become, but for the teacher she'd once been, the one who'd rung the morning bell, kept perfect attendance, and believed every lesson could make the world gentler. Crow was still breathing, shallow, ragged. Taza stood over him, knife in hand. The war inside his eyes was visible. The need for vengeance against the man who had hunted his people balanced against something deeper, harder to name. "Don't," Arlen said quietly. "He's finished. Let the law deal with him." "Your law," Taza said, his voice low, bitter. "Your law has not stopped him before." "I know," she whispered. "But if you kill him now, you'll become what they say you are, the savage they fear." For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then Taza exhaled slowly and lowered the blade. "For you," he said. "I do this for you." Crow tried to speak, but only blood came out. He wouldn't live long. The desert and Mara's knife would see to that. Days passed before the dust truly settled. Federal marshals rode in, summoned by a runner Mara had sent before her final act. They took statements, rounded up what remained of Crow's men, and gathered the shattered pieces of evidence left behind. Crow himself died before he could stand trial. Mara's knife had cut too deep. Dr. Eli Hart arrived soon after, released from his forced detainment near Singing Stone. Once free, he set to work, treating the wounded from both sides, distributing cowpox vaccine, cleansing wounds with carbolic, working tirelessly beneath the scorching Arizona sun. His calm, relentless care spoke of a man who'd seen too much pain to ever turn away from it again. When word reached the Iron Mesa tribe, Taza's sister Cialatea was brought to Ghost Hollow. Fever still raged through her, but Dr. Hart's steady hands and careful nursing turned the tide. Each day, her breathing eased, and color returned to her cheeks. Arlen watched as Taza sat by his sister's bedside, his voice low, singing ancient songs that carried through the canvas walls of the tent. And something in her chest twisted, something warm, terrifying, and impossible to name. On the third day, Marshal Harlan Price, weathered and watchful, called her aside. "Miss Vale," he said, handing her a telegram. "Came in this morning. News from Boston." Arlen unfolded the paper. "The charges against you have been dropped. Silas Boone indicted for fraud and theft. You are cleared of all wrongdoing." She stared at the words, her throat tightening. Freedom. Vindication. The chance to go back east, to reclaim her name, her old life. But when she looked across the camp and saw Taza, his ribs still bound, his movements slow but steady as he helped rebuild a family's shelter, she knew. Boston wasn't home anymore. "I'll stay," she said quietly. "There's work here that needs doing." Price nodded, as though he'd expected it. "Figured as much. The telegraph line's got openings for operators who can be trusted. Your name's been cleared. Folks already know what you did here." He hesitated, then added, softer. "We found papers in Mara Boone's home. She'd been planning this for years. Every route, every fuse, every fallback. Her husband was killed by Crow's men. That part was true. But she let it eat her alive until there was nothing left but revenge." He met Arlen's eyes. "You couldn't have saved her. She'd already decided how her story would end." Arlen nodded slowly, the desert wind tugging at her hair. "I know," she whispered, and for the first time since it all began, she felt the weight of everything, grief, justice, love, and mercy, settle in her chest like dust after a storm. Mara Boone had made her choices, and those choices had carried her to their inevitable end. Her story lingered like smoke after a fire, a warning of what grief could do when it turned poisonous. 2 weeks after the battle at Ghost Hollow, the valley had settled into a fragile kind of peace. Taza Neche was strong enough to travel again. His ribs still ached, but the worst had passed. Cialatea could finally ride, the fever gone, the smallpox scars fading to faint marks that would one day tell their own quiet story of survival. That morning, Arlen Vale walked with Taza up to the ridge overlooking the valley. Below them, life had returned. The trestle was repaired, smoke from cooking fires curled gently into the pale dawn, and children's laughter drifted up on the breeze. Dr. Eli Hart, with funds the territorial government had been shamed into releasing, had turned an abandoned freight shack into a permanent medical station. "You did good work here," Taza said quietly, gazing down at the valley. "You saved many lives." "We saved them," Arlen replied, smiling faintly. "Both of us." He nodded. "Yes. Together." He turned to her then, his dark eyes steady. "My sister lives because of you. My people still breathe because of you. I owe you everything. You owe me nothing," she said softly. "We were partners. That's how partnership works." Taza reached out and took her hand. The gesture came naturally now, forged through danger and shared nights by the fire. "What will you do now?" "I've leased a parcel of land," she said. "The town council gave me Mara's old schoolhouse to run. They decided I was the sensible choice." She smiled faintly. "I'll teach the children mathematics and Morse code, and I'll keep the telegraph lines running. It's honest work." "It's good work," Taza said, brushing his thumb over the back of her hand, the touch warm despite the morning chill. "It is more than enough." He hesitated, then said quietly, "Arlen Vale, in my language there is a word, mitakuya. It means all my relations. It speaks of how everything living is connected, how we belong to one another." He paused, searching for the English words. Since the day we met, since we fought side by side, you became part of my mitakuya. You are not alone anymore. Arlen squeezed his hand, her voice barely above a whisper. And you're part of mine, my family. Relief softened his expression, but a shadow of duty crossed it soon after. My band moves with the seasons, he said. We do not stay where fences rise. The reservation closes tighter every year, and still we resist. I will travel, sometimes for many moons. I know, Arlen said quietly. She had been preparing for this moment, even if it broke her heart a little. I will return when I can, he promised. Spring for certain, when the snow clears, when the land breathes again. Each time I return, I will come to you first. His hand lifted to her face, fingers gentle against her cheek. You will be my anchor in this changing world. And you'll be mine. She leaned into his touch, feeling the rough calluses of a man who had lived by strength and honor. I'll build something here, Taza. A place that lasts. Somewhere your people can come for help, for news, for shelter. Somewhere safe. He looked at her for a long moment, admiration softening his warrior's face. You would do this? I already am. Her smile trembled but held. I'm not the same woman who knelt in the dust, holding a broken blade, afraid of everything. You helped me become someone who stands her ground. Taza's expression gentled, the fierce mask falling away. When we first met, he said, I thought I would have to kill you, or die by your hand. I did not expect. He stopped, words failing him. Neither did I, Arlen murmured. But I'm glad we were both wrong. He moved closer, slowly, giving her space to turn away if she wished. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that was both fierce and tender, born from everything they had endured together. Every wound, every act of courage, every moment of trust earned in a land that showed mercy to no one. When they parted, both were breathing hard. Taza rested his forehead against hers, their quiet gesture more intimate than any word. I will come back, he said, voice rough but certain. Every spring, every season I can. I'll be here, Arlen whispered, building our future, waiting for you. They stood there on the ridge as the sun climbed above the horizon. Two souls who had started as enemies and ended as something far greater. Partners, survivors, and perhaps something even deeper that no word in either of their languages could fully name. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying the pulse of life returning. Children's laughter, hammers striking metal, the faint whistle of a distant train. From the ridge, Arlen Vale looked down at the world being rebuilt, the smoke from cook fires curling into the pale Arizona sky. Below, Cialatea waited with the rest of Taza Neche's band. The girl's face still bore faint traces of the smallpox, but her smile was radiant, alive, unbroken. She waved up at them, and Taza lifted a hand in return. She wants to meet you properly, he said quietly. To thank you. I'd like that. Arlen slipped her fingers into his, holding on for one last moment before the inevitable parting. In the spring, Taza said, I will teach you to track, to read the earth, the sky, and the wind. There is much you do not yet know about surviving in this land. Arlen smiled faintly. Then I'll teach you something too. The Army's private telegraph codes, the ones they don't share with the public. Taza's lips curved in amusement. We'll trade knowledge. And maybe a few other things. He leaned in and kissed her. Slow, deep, full of that bitter-sweet ache that only comes with a goodbye weighted by promise. Then, hand in hand, they descended the ridge. At the base, Ciala ran to meet them, dark eyes wide with curiosity. "You are the woman who helped my brother save me," she said in careful English. Then she spoke something soft and melodic in her own tongue. Taza's brows rose, clearly surprised. "What did she say?" Arlen asked, half smiling. "She says," he began, hesitating, "that you have a good face, and that you must come visit our camp so she can teach you proper words and proper cooking." Arlen laughed, the sound catching her by surprise. "Tell her I'd be honored." "In the spring, perhaps," Taza translated, and Ciala beamed. Then the girl grew solemn, speaking again in Lakota, the cadence low and deliberate. "She says the stars told her you would come," Taza said, voice hushed, "that you were meant to save us." He paused, his gaze softening. "She dreams things sometimes. The Greyhawk elders call her a dreamer." A chill rippled through Arlen, not of fear, but recognition. Maybe destiny had played its hand. Or maybe it was simply that two lost souls had found each other at the right time and chosen to fight side by side. Either way, it didn't matter. What mattered was what they would do next. "Tell her," Arlen said, crouching to meet Ciala's eyes, "that I'm glad the stars were right." An hour later, the Iron Mesa tribe moved north, a long, silent column that seemed to merge with the land itself. Arlen stood in front of her small telegraph station, watching until the last rider vanished beyond the horizon. Taza had looked back once, raising his hand in farewell. She'd done the same. Then he was gone. But this time, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. Inside, the click of the telegraph filled the air, a rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Arlen sat at her desk, fingers moving with practiced ease, translating the dots and dashes into meaning, into connection. Beyond the station walls, Ghost Hollow lived again. Children playing, the saloon bustling, laughter echoing against the hills. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, she wrote a letter to her mother's sister back in Boston, the one person who had believed her innocence when no one else had. She wrote of the territory, of rebuilding, of finding purpose. She did not mention Taza by name. Some things were too sacred, too new to expose to the judgment of distance. But she wrote, "I have found friends in the most unlikely places. I have learned that trust must be earned, that courage often comes when all hope is gone, and that sometimes the people we fear the most are the ones who teach us what it means to live." She sealed the letter and set it aside for the next mail coach. Then she lit the oil lamp and turned back to the telegraph, the soft clicking tying her to the wider world while grounding her in this one. Spring would come. It always did, and when it came, when the snow melted from the passes and the prairie bloomed green again, Taza Neche would return. They would have time then, time to build on what had survived the blood and the fire. For now, it was enough to know he was alive. His sister was healing. His people were safe. Arlen Vale, once of Boston, now of Ghost Hollow, Arizona territory, sat at her desk and smiled. She had survived. More than that, she had belonged. Above her desk hung the spirit blade, polished and wrapped in oiled cloth, a reminder of the words that had once defined them both: "End me, or make me yours." They had chosen the latter, and built a new world from it. And in that choice, they had both been remade, forged by fire, loss, and the fragile mercy they'd chosen to give each other. Outside, the Arizona night stretched wide and endless, the stars surfacing one by one across the velvet sky. Far to the north, Taza Neche was likely making camp beneath those same stars, his fire flickering low, his thoughts perhaps drifting toward her, as hers now drifted toward him. Inside the small telegraph station, the steady rhythm of the keys broke the silence. Sharp, deliberate, alive. Arlen Vale's fingers danced across the brass, translating the coded language of distant towns into meaning, into connection. For the first time in a long while, her life had direction. Her heart had purpose. And when spring came, when the prairie winds turned warm, when the geese cut their path north through the blue, she would be waiting. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso legal, disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.